Ideas in STEM Ed is a production of the Idea Engineering Student Center at UC San Diego, which works to promote community, success, and inclusion at all levels. My name is Darren Lapomi, Professor of Nanoengineering and Chemical Engineering and Faculty Director of the Idea Center. The purpose of this podcast is to provide a forum for the discussion of innovative and inclusive approaches to teaching and mentoring, and to support the personal and academic flourishing and success of students in science and engineering. To learn more about the Idea Center, visit jacobschool.ucsd.edu/idea. I'm speaking today for the second time to one of my all-time favorite people, Dr. Brandon Marin. Brandon is a highly decorated engineer in the area of semiconductor packaging at Intel and someone who has a virtual phone book of patents to his credit. Those of you who listened to episode 8 know some of Brandon's backstory: an addiction to drugs and alcohol that made him homeless and frequently jailed, then, through hard work and determination, an escape from despair to complete not only his undergraduate degree at USC, but his PhD at UC San Diego. If you haven't listened to episode 8, it's not necessary to go back since we cover new ground here. I'm going to start by playing Brandon's keynote address at the 2021 Engineering Ring Ceremony. Then he and I sat down to talk about second chances, explaining blunders on your resume, and how to persist in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. The Zoom audio is a little bit iffy at times, but Brandon's wisdom shines through.
The last year has been a tough endeavor for everyone. Perseverance, along with patience, has been an indispensable principle to draw from. I don't need to go into details about why this past year has been tough, and I know that every single person can draw their personal experience for this, but I'd like to give my remarks on perseverance. These remarks are very personal to me, and frankly, I'm still very terrified to talk about this story. I'm a recovered drug addict and alcoholic. I have been convicted of terrible crimes, and I used to be homeless. I am a loving husband and father of 3, homeowner, doctor of science and chemical engineering, and master of science in nanoengineering, a first-generation Mexican-American, and the first in his family to go to college. I'm a prolific scientist with over 50 patents, publications, and awards and accolades. So these two different parts of me contrast very starkly, and I'd like to share with you a portion of that story that binds those two parts together and what I did to build that story. I've been sober for over 14 years, so my life and the work to build it has by no means been a short and easy process. It started when I was a teenager, and it started with curiosity and frankly, a large dose of arrogance. I say arrogance because when I was young, I had the presupposition that I was smart, and because I was smart, I was immune to the negative consequences of drugs and alcohol. I thought that the only really bad stuff happened to other people, not honor students or studying engineers. So in high school, I lived a double life. In the daytime, I was an honor student and I excelled at all my work. And on the weekend, I was partying like I had 9 lives to live, and I was experimenting with hard drugs. For some time, I held it together. And I even got accepted to many prestigious universities. But this further fueled that arrogance that what I was doing was perfectly fine. Little did I know that this disease would begin to progress. Once I left to university, this disease of addiction had amplified and it intensified because living in the dorms with no supervision, it was the perfect environment for this disease to nurture itself and multiply and proliferate. When I was in college, in addition to using methamphetamine, I started using heroin. Then I began combining the two and started injecting them. At this point, my grades quickly deteriorated, and I began running out of money and started stealing and terrorizing my university in order to feed my addiction. The culmination of all these acts resulted in my arrest in front of the campus library and my indefinite suspension from the university. That day when I was in front of that library in handcuffs, my heart crumbled because I saw something that I worked so very hard for just fall apart, and it was falling apart only by my own hand. That year was 2003, and sadly, it was not the end of my nightmare. Once I was released from jail after that arrest, I knew that I lost my opportunity for a career as an engineer. So I chased the only thing that would make me feel better, and that was more drugs and more alcohol. I started doing more elaborate and more serious crimes to support my addiction, and the court cases piled up. I started getting caught by the police more and more. My judge at the time was Judge Michael Tynan, and he constantly told me I was throwing away my gifts and I was throwing away my potential, and he gave me many opportunities to set my life straight. But instead of taking those opportunities, I started doubling down. My family, who supported me and loved me to the extreme, was betrayed. And in order to escape that pain of hurting my family, I took to the streets. For this time, I was homeless. I was living under an awning on Broadway Boulevard in downtown Los Angeles, right across the street from the Orpheum Theater. To support my habit, I started working for a local branch of the cartel and started holding drugs for them. This was a really, really dark time for me. And during this time, I was literally brought back to life on multiple occasions. The drugs were all I knew and all that I lived for. I couldn't imagine life with it, and I couldn't imagine life without it. Working for these local distributors took me to some terrifying places. But by this time, my disease had stripped all emotions away from me. I was numb. Even on the days when I had the cold steel of a gun pressed against my head, this wouldn't really elicit any type of response. I knew at that moment that I wanted to die. And the sad thing was, I tried and I tried and I tried. And every single time, I would wake up at a different hospital in a different bed with the salty taste of drugs that they used to revive me. This felt like a curse, and just like a curse, it was unending, and it kept going. One night, I was sleeping outside in the rain, and I sat there thinking about my old life, all the potential and hopes that I had as a young man. I thought about how my mom told me and warned me that as a Latino, I would have to do every single thing right in today's system in order to carve a good life for myself, and how there was no chance of that now. I completely destroyed that potential. That night, I just felt like another statistic, and I felt like a failure, and I was a failure. In that pit of despair, I wanted any single thing but that life. I wanted to feel anything but what I was feeling on that night. And anything simple would be fine. So I sat there and I thought, God, please just give me a job at Starbucks. Give me a job at Big Lots. Just take this addiction away from me. And maybe someday give me a bank account again. And, I will be eternally grateful for that. And I'll do everything in my power to devote my life to repaying that gift. So I sat there and I thought rationally, and that rational thought brought me to the conclusion that my life ran by me was unmanageable. I needed somebody else to tell me how to live and what to do. So to me, the best thing at that moment and the best idea that I had was to turn myself into the courts and just go to prison. If I went to prison, at least I would have something telling me what to do. My judge, Judge Tynan, already had a 3-year sentence waiting for me because of all the previous failures at rehabilitation and my crimes. So this seemed like the best solution. Being a no-nonsense judge, I knew without a doubt that Judge Tynan would send me to prison too the next time that I saw him, whether I liked it or not. So I accepted this fate, and I was optimistic. The next day, I did what all real gangsters do when they're in trouble, and I called my mom and I asked her for help. I asked her to give me a ride to court. I went to court, and by a stroke of luck, Judge Tynan was sick that day. The interim judge that was in his place decided to send me to rehab one last time. That day was March 9th of 2007, and that was the last day that I drank or used any drugs. In rehab, I got involved with Alcoholics Anonymous, and with that program and the help of many wonderful men and women, I began to rebuild my life one day at a time. I completed the 4-month program that my court assigned, and once I was released, I started working with a sponsor and started making amends for the damage that I had done. Started with my family. Although I had nothing to give monetarily, I gave them the offer that I would commit myself to stay sober, and I'd strive to be a better person with each passing day. And slowly my life was rebuilt with baby steps. I got a simple job as a clerk. and I treated that job like it was the greatest gift that was given to me. I went to meetings, I listened to my sponsor, I surrounded myself with people that I looked up to, and these people taught me to be diligent, dependable, honest, and above all others, they taught me to help other people. Slowly, my life began to become something that I was proud of, and it wasn't because of the things that I owned on the outside or what I had on the outside. It was because of who I was becoming on the inside. In 2008, I began to tackle a laundry list of requirements to end my suspension and return to my university. I completed the requirements and I graduated in 2011. From then onward, my life just expanded exponentially. I applied to grad school and I got accepted despite all the wrongdoings of my past. I got married in 2016. I defended my PhD in 2017, and I became a father in 2019. But the key takeaway, obviously, is that my life is much, much more beautiful today than it was in 2007, and it's a far cry from that cold night. There are countless other stories and miraculous events, serendipity, and wonderful events that happened within that 14 years. But with the limited time I have with you, I just want to summarize a few key things. My story may seem very familiar, or it may seem very foreign to you. I'm by no means saying that my specific experience is what is needed to succeed, or am I even claiming that my experience is even unique, because I know that it's not. But the one thing that I do share with every single one of you is my capacity to make mistakes and learn from them, and to grow into a better person. Mistakes are what make us human, and they're what make us better people. Some mistakes are so bad that they stop us dead in our tracks and paralyze us with fear. These are the types of mistakes that we feel we can't go forward without solving them, and sometimes we choose not to move forward. But what I want to say today is that there's no mistake that's too great that can't be overcome with enough work, perseverance, and fortitude. There's a strength to be drawn from all of our imperfections. And my life experience has shown me that when we embrace our mistakes and we're striving to learn from them, that's when we show our best selves. In closure, I'd like to congratulate every single one of you on your hard work and your tireless investments in your future. I'm excited for every single one of you, and I'm excited for the next chapter of your lives. It's without question that this class is the bright future of our discipline, and the coming years I know will show us that our fellow Tritons will make a great impact on our world.
Brandon Marin, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So sometimes we as professors advise our students to explain the D, F, or W, or maybe the time that they got caught cheating on a homework assignment or an exam, and they freak out about this. Like they really feel they need to explain it to their prospective employer. And your situation seems about 10 to 100 times more or 1,000 times more severe than that. How was it nerve-wracking applying for jobs? Were you worried about how your prospective employers might view your situation?
That's a really great question. And yeah, it definitely was nerve-wracking. I think let me just start really with applying to PhD programs, because I think that was my first experience where I really had to be transparent about what my background was, and what, pretty much the truth about, where I came from, some of the things I experienced, and why that was all terrifying. So when I was applying to PhD programs, I took a break from school. I took about it was about at least 5 years of a break from school, specifically undergrad at USC. And then, like the video says, that was in the middle of my addiction. So I had tons of F's and D's, withdrawals on my transcript. And I came back to USC, did a lot better when I wasn't full of drugs, was a lot more motivated. And then the time came around. At the moment, I was just so happy that USC was able to have me. You know what I mean? Like that, I was happy that I was given a second chance just to finish my bachelor's. And I was very grateful for that. And then as time progressed, people in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and even my own research advisor at the time, Noah Momsat, asked me how I felt about grad school. And that was always a lifelong goal of mine, was to get a PhD, because I'm the first person in my family to go to college. But I didn't want to just go to college. Like, I wanted to blast like the benchmark like out of the water. Like, I really wanted to set a high bar for like my family and my kids, and go as far as I could. So I always wanted to get a PhD. So when my advisor asked me about, applying to PhD programs, if that was something I was interested in, I was like, of course. But up to that moment, I never thought that it was something possible with my background. And so I started applying. To schools, and I knew when I talked to Noah about this, he said, the thing that's going to work with this, there's plenty of situations where you might want to, accept a grad student, for one reason or another, and you're willing to ignore other things or, deprioritize certain things. And for him, he told me, like, to be fair, all I really care about in my students is that they're, productive researchers. Everything else is really, their business. And that was comforting to me, because it was, he asked me about grad school because I did very well as an undergrad in his research group. So he said, if you focus on the things that you're good at, and you're honest about, your background and what caused those problems with your grades, I think people will accept you for the right reasons, and that resonated with me, because there's a saying, like, it's better to be loved for who you are, or hated for who you are, instead of being loved for who you aren't, and that was like something that resonated with me. And every single grad school I applied for, I had to send emails to the prospective professors explaining my situation, because I knew that my transcript alone would eliminate me from lots of schools. So I sent emails to tons of professors. A lot of them at UCSD probably remember those emails out of the blue. One of them was Andrea Tao, who was my first advisor at UCSD. And she asked for a little bit more detail behind that. And, at first it was like, hey, this is something that I did in the past, and I made some mistakes, but I have some recommendations and advocates who can say that I'm really focused on doing better and that I would be a good grad student. It's pretty much that, but she asked for more detail, and I sent her a summary that's pretty much the first podcast that you and I did. Andrea replied that, this is something that's really admirable, in my opinion, and I thank you for just having such brutal honesty with me. And she used, she emphasized how this was another level of honesty, and she appreciated that. And she said, I'll do what I can on my side, but if you get accepted, my only request is that you just show everybody that it was worth taking the risk, and that it's and that you want to be here. And
Sure.
And that was, that request was like easy for me to do. And that was the general attitude that I received from professors at different universities, University of Texas, UC Davis, all these different universities. I was surprised that so many people were amenable to having me as a grad student, given my sordid background, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And just really quickly, even similarly for job applications, it was also a very similar experience. I was surprised at the surprised at the response of people when I told them what my background was and why I had this this ding on my record. And Intel's pretty notorious for being a very selective company. So when I got the call from my HR representative telling me how my boss really didn't care about anything that I did before 2010, it was very refreshing, and it was really nice. I mean, pretty soon, I mean, just to kind of to make a shout out, I mean, Intel's going to do a quick article on that with highlighting kind of that experience and how my situation was working with HR and through that whole I guess the best way to put it is they're going to do an expose on how that experience was, and I mean, to me it's funny because I'm kind of pausing a lot at this, and you probably can see it like in the way that I'm talking, because usually it's a little bit easier for me to be direct and explain my thoughts very clearly. But the reason why, it's this kind of a very stuttered conversation is this is still very terrifying for me, even up to this moment. 14 years later, I am still terrified that one day somebody's going to tap me on the back and say, hey, you don't belong here. This was actually a big mistake. Yeah. You got to come with us. And that just kind of shows how much of an imprint that whole situation was on me, like that whole traumatic
how could it not be?
Of addiction. Yeah. And that's okay. I've learned to live with that fear, and I've learned to accept, and gradually it's getting better, and the fear is diminishing over time, and that's just the natural process of fear. But I actually welcome it sometimes too, because it makes me feel that it was very real, and I still, it kind of puts there's an aspect of comfort to it too. So yeah, just wanted to touch on that point, but yeah, generally sure. It was very surprising.
So viewers watching on YouTube might see when your video cut out a second ago that you are Brandon's 12 Monkeys of the Apocalypse. And I wonder if and clearly that you have a sense of humor. And I wonder if your intense sense of humor has helped you cope. If you were a more you are a serious scholar and a serious engineer, but you do have this intensely funny side as well. And in what ways is that important?
I would definitely say the humor is not a product of that situation, but it definitely helped cope with that situation. I got my sense of humor from my father. And he was a big ham, and he was really happy to be around. I loved his energy and his personality. He made it fun to do like the most mundane things, and that's kind of how I try to be with my son. But that sense of humor was always something I used even as a child and going into my adulthood as a way not just to cope with things, but just to be an icebreaker to lots of difficult social situations. Laughter very much is a cure-all for many situations. And I think as I started getting into my disease of addiction, and the situation became more and more dire, that sense of humor luckily never went away. And oftentimes I used it to kind of just get by from day to day and make fun of my situation, and even when you hear probably if you review the podcast, there are tons of situations in the middle of my disease where I try to make fun of it, then I try to use like hyperbole to kind of show how it was almost a comedy of errors, my situation. And how, and just the contrast of it, it's, and I think after a certain point, it starts to be part of the healing. And I think you actually brought this up to me when we were conversing. Sometimes it's interesting with addicts and alcoholics, like the things that we laugh at, because they're usually very tragic, traumatic experiences. But in hindsight, once you've recovered, once you've gotten to a point where you're actually comfortable in your own skin, looking back at those situations, the only way that you can really even process is just kind of sometimes just humor, because it's so absurd what you used to be like compared to what you are now. And yeah, so so it definitely helped. I think a sense of humor is something that I'm always looking for when I'm trying to find someone for my team. And you personally know that a sense of humor is something that I love to surround myself with, and my friends and family. And yeah, I mean, it's just something that keeps you sharp too. I mean, just coming, just poking fun, for example, just Home Depot style jokes that are just like, you could tell at the bus stop, versus jokes like that me and you have like said at MRS, watching very detailed scientific talks and, making metaphors and cultural references with something that completely is on a different level. And to me, that's fun. I love that. And I think it's always something of a,
fitting
privilege to
Star
be
Trek, Star Wars, and The Simpsons into every possible scenario.
Yeah, exactly. Simpsons is definitely something that fits into all aspects of life, right?
Yeah. So I've been having a lot of problems with insomnia in 2021. A lot of like events have happened this year, and getting COVID, loss of my father, and so on. And when I get up around the time when my alarm is going to go off, I look at the clock, and it never fails. 100 days in a row I've done this. Look at my clock, it's 5:55. I feel pretty good. My alarm is going to go off at 6, and I say, all things considered, I'd say pretty good, which is a Dr. McCoy line from Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country, when he's under interrogation by the Klingon lawyer. Like, right. How are you doing at your age? All things considered, I'd say pretty good. So you mentioned, all things considered, that you mentioned this to me a while ago in one of our previous conversations, that you've had anxieties about how drug and alcohol use has affected your long-term health, if at all. What have been your conclusions? Now, I should say that, like, for me, I've had like pretty intense anxiety most of my life. I've had all kinds of like clinical manifestations, like heart arrhythmia, sweating, jaw joint dislocation kind of stuff. And I kind of feel like I've finally gotten it under control with like anxiety medication, which I really do feel like is going to lengthen my life. and but then I think about like all the things that did happen, like to me physiologically, and whether or not I'll like, did I lose 5-10 years of my life? What have been your conclusions about that? Like how your experience has affected your long-term health?
Well, I mean, to be honest, you can't go multiple years of treating yourself like a human garbage can without having some health ramifications. I think for me, the silver lining is I got through this when I was young, so I bounced back very quickly. I got sober at 24, which relatively is very young. A lot of people get sober much later, and that's hard. But to this day, I still do not. I still have a lot of consequences of that, and I think that's just part of the game. I'm part of the nature of the disease, and I think of John Wick, the movie. One line in there is like, there's a single line with a single word that they often say. One is rules, and the other one is consequences, which they're referring to breaking the rules. And it's a trilogy. And this comes up again and again. And I always think about that. And I always tell my son this too, because he'll like, Dada, like, this broke. And I'm like, yep, consequences, Malachi. and I think of that as kind of like, for this whole thing that I did with the drugs and the alcohol. And right now, I mean, some of the things that definitely have been affecting me is some kidney issues. not necessarily like kidney problems, but my chemistry has always been a little off with my kidneys and my liver. And I find that it's very sensitive to changes in diet. And it doesn't necessarily cause many issues, but it shows up on my panels, and they go out of spec, and it's a sign of alcoholism. But for me, it's more just a sign of all the things my liver and kidneys had to process over 14 years ago. And it comes and goes. And lately, as I've been trying to secure things like life insurance, it comes up. But and hasn't really been much of an issue, but I know that's going to be something that I'm going to have to continually look out for the rest of my life,
Sure.
And luckily, I think the one thing that most people fear is how it affects the brain. My family thought that I would not be like mentally able to go back to school. They thought I just fried most of my brain. Luckily, that organ it bounces back really, really fast. And I would say that, today, even when I went back to USC, like I felt a lot more aware and conscious than I ever was before I got sober. You know what I mean? Even before I started doing drugs. And maybe that's just a result of maturity, learning more or anything like that. But I felt like I didn't see too many consequences there, which was very comforting. Not all drugs are like that, though. Specifically, I did a lot of methamphetamine and heroin. Those tend to be a little bit lighter on the brain damage.
Oh, yes, of course.
and
That's
things
what
like
I think of.
Exactly. That tends to be a little bit lighter. It's hints and remnants of cocoa and lime in this one. But things like crack cocaine, bath salts, those things can be really hard on the brain, and that's kind of just the nature of it. So I think overall there's a lot of clearly the mental health issues are something that you deal with for eternity, right? Because recovering from alcoholism is a mental disease in many ways. So recovering from that and maintaining your sobriety is a constant activity, and for the for the actual health part, it's kind of more as it comes and goes. You know what I mean? Luckily, I was able to skate by with minimal consequences on that end. But there are some things that I need to look out for. One thing I wanted to touch on specifically too with your comment on mental health is I feel that there are some benefits to it too. I think, and this is in terms of mental health, I feel like depression has a very, very high bar for me these days. It's hard for me to get really down and out about things. And I think that's a result of the fact that I put a lot of things in perspective to my disease. And even you commented on this one time. You don't need to baseline everything to being homeless in downtown LA. And that's 100% true. If I'm thinking about getting a professorship or something like that, I don't need to say like, oh, hey, well, at least I'm not homeless. That helps me deal with that, but I don't need to constantly baseline off of that. But I feel like that's actually something that's helped me with depression is I always do have a little bit more perspective on that and the grander scheme of things. And it's very much helped me in that respect. And I also feel as a person, it's helped me appreciate things more, and have more of a sense of gratitude. And that was something I don't think I had a really good grasp on before I got sober. So even the small things in life, I have definitely a higher consciousness. I'm more conscious about those things, and it's a little bit easier to recognize that, I feel, than before when I got sober. So I wanted to talk about the benefits as well as the dings on my record. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I definitely understand that. That reframing of what is possible, but that you don't always want to use that as a touch point, because you still do want to have a lot of success in your life, um, which you are achieving, of course.
Yeah.
This our guest has a phone book of patents, by the way,
Yeah.
as won Intel's highest awards. So I'd like to close in the last 10 minutes with some rapid fire questions about
Sure.
education, and let's start with I have about 10 of these, so just to you can time our discussion.
No problem.
What advice would you give to students about studying? Like when you were a TA, how do you study?
I study. I've always been very light on studying, just because my memory is pretty good. That's not what I would advise, though. It's really that's really something. I mean, if you have it, you use it. If you don't, then you gotta. This is what I recommend. Playing the long game is really good with studying. So not waiting to the last moment and just doing a brain dump on your exam is really a good thing to do, and a really good habit to build early. When I got into grad school, with some of the things that I just couldn't simply just memorize, from the lecture, from not taking notes, I would usually do exercises like when homework wasn't like required. And doing small activities like that over the long term, I feel helped me a lot more than cramming the night before. I mean, just naturally when we're young, we want to be procrastinators, so that's kind of a hard habit to build. But it's something that I think is invaluable when you become a professional, because procrastination can have very severe consequences on your job record, your execution, your efficiency. So getting that habit of preparing early really helps in the long run. So that's kind of the best advice I would give with that.
What makes a good project in academia versus what makes a good project in industry?
So in I think the main thing in academia. Okay, let me separate it into three parts. What I think is most interesting to me in academia, what works, I think, in academia, and then what makes something interesting in industry. So for the first one, what's most interesting to me is something that is unique and shows a creative way of thinking about a problem in academia. I feel like those are the most impactful papers, and those are the most impactful projects. Unfortunately, academia definitely has trends and hot topics. And I say unfortunately because maybe not everybody's interested in biosensors at one time, you know what I mean? Or cancer research. Maybe somebody just wants to study where the moon came from. And that's why I say what's interesting to me, because I love to learn where the moon came from. But if I want to get something that's going to be high impact in academia, I need to align it with what is interesting to the world right now in terms of research problems. So, for example, cancer research. So if that is something that is trending at the time, finding something that mixes both of those, like how does, for example, low gravity on the moon affect cancer? Melting those two together, I feel, is like the perfect recipe for finding something that will both make you happy and also help you succeed in academia. So
I
that's
love that
my take.
example.
yeah, right. On the fly with that one. But in terms of industry, it's a completely different animal that I've learned. And I've been talking to Adam and Suchol, who are friends of mine that are professors at U of A. You really have to be in tune with what is a business interest at the time, and most importantly, the commercial viability of it. If you come up with the most awesome sensor, but there's no way to make it for cheap or on a large scale to solve the problem on the scale that you intend to solve. So, for example, if it's something that affects everybody in the world, you need to make sure that solution is scalable to that level. Otherwise, it's effectively useless. So having that perspective is indispensable, I think, in industry. Making sure that you are in tune with what can be commercially viable, cheap to manufacture, solve your problem, but also, can be realized very easily, in industry. So I think that is something that you definitely just have to learn by working for a while, depending on your industry or sector that you choose to join, like biochemical or oil and gas or something like that. Once you actually are in there for a little bit, it's easier to figure out what the problems are and where the unique solutions are, and the high risk, high reward types of targets. So yeah, that's kind of how I would separate those two.
So you and a lot of our audience members will have done or will do a substantial amount of tutoring, TAing, other kinds of instruction, and they worry that when they get their job, they won't be able to do those things anymore. And I suspect that this notion is wrong, that there is a lot of room for a lot of opportunity to do mentoring. What does that look like in the semiconductor industry? How do you mentor? How do you have the opportunity to mentor younger colleagues?
So one thing that I've been doing at Intel recently is I've started a work group that's almost like a seminar. It's weekly, and we do topics every week, and we talk about them. Topics at Intel, like specific, like for example, it could be how our high-speed interconnects work, and how do they electrically function, the basics of that. Or another week could be something like the electrolytic copper plating module, those tools that do electrolytic copper plating. How do those work? What are the fundamentals, and what are the problems in industry right now with those types of tools? Those topics seem very simple, but I feel to what I've observed at Intel is that, and I think it's something that runs rampant across the engineering industry as a whole, is everyone in engineering is smart. They are so smart that they're afraid to ask the most basic questions if they don't know the answer to them. And it's a paralyzing fear, especially when you're getting paid to do a job. But it's also something that cuts productivity, because if you don't know something, you're it's a very small chance that you will do anything in that area because you're afraid of getting it wrong. So to me, coming up with a forum where it's a safe environment to ask questions about the simplest things has been a really, really good resource, I think, for my specific sector. And that's what I've been using lately to mentor and help. And this falls in line with the whole vein of education that I love being a part of. So to kind of put it higher level, mentoring is what you make it. You can make it work anywhere. You don't need to be a TA or a teacher. You can be a teacher anywhere. Yeah, it's just whether or not you have the initiative to make something out of that. And Intel, one thing I wanted to do is I felt like people weren't asking questions at the big meetings because they didn't want to ask the VP something simple, or they don't want to look stupid. I think most importantly, people just don't want to look stupid, and that's a fair fear, and I have that fear a lot of the times too. And I think that's something that needs to be broken in both academia and industry, because I feel like the sooner we get rid of that, the quicker we'll be in a mindset to learn at a more rapid rate, and we can progress, as a whole very, very fast. So yeah, that's kind of an example of what I've done. And my main advice would be, you can mentor wherever you are, and it's really just making it work for you and finding out what makes you happy. So I'd encourage anybody to figure that out and just try to implement it in any day-to-day role that they have.
Wonderful, and a great note to end on. Dr. Brandon Marin, thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure to chat again.
Thanks for having me again.
Thanks for listening to Ideas in STEM Ed, a production of the Idea Engineering Student Center in the Jacobs School of Engineering at UC San Diego. This episode was edited and engineered by Sky Lee, with theme music written and performed by John Viviani. Title art was created by Caitlin Wong. Special thanks to Sarah Eckert for guest booking and marketing. The Idea Center works to promote community, success, and inclusion at all levels. To reach us for guest suggestions and other feedback, please send an email to ideadirector@eng.ucsd.edu. And to learn more about our programs, visit jacobschool.ucsd.edu/idea. As a final note, the views expressed by me or the guests do not necessarily reflect those of the Idea Center, the Jacobs School of Engineering, or UC San Diego. See you next time.